Well, hello and welcome back to the Opinioneers. We've had a little break, but now we're back with a vengeance.
With vengeance, I think you mean.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm Derek Cheshire, chameleonomist. I'll never get one of these days. I'll pronounce that right. Chameleonomist. That's it. Innovationist, visiting professor, speaker, author, and radio presenter. And this is Stuart Webb, exceedingly good-looking guy and fractional chief operating officer and all-round business genius. Well, at least that's what the notes say. So
yeah, that's reasonable.
Indeed, and they must be right. So here we are back again, and today's subject is anticipatory innovation. Is it not?
It is.
So we're digging all these things out from the OPSI, which is the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. And we've just been having a debate offline about, does anybody outside the public sector actually use this and why? Which might be a good place to start.
Yeah, and I'll continue with that discussion now. So what was it we were saying before we got on air? I was just saying to Derek that for me, I haven't seen many businesses, even very large businesses, do anticipatory innovation very well. It's something that is, I think, done better within organizations where the risk of failure is more tolerated. And so often that is public bodies, that is governments, research universities, maybe some research funded work going on within large organizations, but it's largely funded by people who are prepared to allow large sums of money to just go out the window. And it is not something which always produces a very high return immediately. It's very, very speculative stuff. I was saying to Derek, I saw people like the National Grid do anticipatory innovation. Why? Because the government forced them to do it. They effectively said, we want you as a publicly funded body effectively to be showing return to the government by doing some of this stuff. And they would get partners to sort of do that because it would lead to longer term savings. I've seen it done well in universities. My background, I was a research scientist. I've seen the risks taken by universities to do this groundbreaking, often stuff. And why? Well, because nobody expects some research. I mean, I was in my field in universities in my virus. I was looking into persistent human viruses for 15 years. 15 years of doing that, and I'd still only just scratched the surface of what was going on. I really hadn't actually got to the stage where somebody could turn around and go, so is it solved yet? Are we going to get a big return on this? And so for me, this anticipatory innovation, and let's just what we're saying, what we're defining here, it's the practice of creating new value shifting innovations in environments of deep uncertainty, in proactively shaping future priorities by exploring and acting on emerging trends and signals of change. So I've just read that from my notes. So this approach is really for people who are trying to prepare future challenges and opportunities by making future knowledgeable actions through real experimentation and strategic foresight. It's not something most businesses can afford to do. They have not got the resources, deep pockets, to turn around and say, let's invest 20, 30 years into something which is highly speculative and see what happens. But a government can think that way. I don't think often enough that they do, because once again, priorities are shifted too quickly by politicians who don't have a time frame longer than 4 or 5 years. But it is not something that I see too many businesses do. Now,
yeah, I mean,
come back and tell me I'm wrong, please.
Oh, you're wrong. No, the thing that I picked out of the blurb was the 2 words. What was it? Yeah, foresight ecosystems, which is, I mean, there is, as you said, there's the long termness of it, but also the idea of having an ecosystem which supports and almost tries to drag out of the organization this idea of looking into the future and almost working for a crystal ball a lot of the time.
Yeah, I agree. And
it can work. I mean, I came across I I can't remember where they are now. All I can remember is that they were in Ireland. It was their equivalent of a regional development agency, and they created a whole new sort of, I suppose it was, I don't know, green print. It wasn't a blueprint really; it was a green print, but in which they created this idea of a completely regenerated region, where the new build in terms of towns would go, where the roads would go, with the schools, everything that you could imagine. And they created this lovely vision of something that would be, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 years in the making.
That's the sort of time scale, isn't it?
It worked brilliantly because people could see actually what people were envisaging. And I think that the problem is, if you don't have the right, I hate to use the term ecosystem because it drags up all sorts of things, but if you don't have the right way of showing people, I mean, it's a bit like a show and tell, but there's nothing to show because you haven't built it yet. But yeah, it's a little like, kids at primary school building something with their Lego and plasticine and saying, "Mummy, this is what my new house is going to look like."
Yeah.
And we people often have the same reaction. Oh, yeah, of course it is, but why not? And that's the thing. I think some companies do it, but it's not widespread.
Okay, so let's so having sort of done the Debbie Downer, and I appreciate I am Debbie Downer on this one. Debbie Downer, yeah, let's go with Debbie Downer. I don't know who else is a downer, but somebody's going to be a downer.
Somebody called David, maybe you could have a David Downer.
Could have a David Downer.
How about this week, Donald Downer?
Donald Downer. Let's okay. Let's just move away from that one very quickly before we go any further. What is it that you think, or what is it we think possibly, that a smaller business can do to sort of get a little bit ahead of the trend? Because if you are able to do a little bit of this sort of anticipation, if you're able to do something in order to move your business forward by just being a bit proactive, what could you do? Well, there are two things which I think are really critical here. First of which is doing what I would describe as what you used the word just now, foresight workshops. So, what could you do to get people together and say, well, what could the future look like? What could we see coming up? What could we imagine? Now, the future is ultimately, we know, impossible to predict. But you can look a little way ahead, 2 years maybe. I mean, although nobody would have predicted, as you put, what was going to happen electorally this year. But let's just say you can look a couple of years ahead and say, well, what can we see? Now, we could do some trend analysis. We could go up, we could do some analysis of current industry trends, emerging technologies. And I go, right, there are things coming down the road. A few years ago, you would be sitting there going, I've been hearing about this AI stuff. What does that mean for our business? What could we do with AI? So in a couple of years' time, where will AI be? Where will future trends of technology be? What are you seeing in the press? What are you seeing in the whatever, in order to help you think to yourself, I need to get ahead of the trend. So let's do some future foresight workshops. Let's do some things where we look ahead and look for strategic decisions and strategic actions to help us. The other thing that I think businesses can really do well, they need to adopt more flexible business models, because we're so rigidly fixed. It takes a very long time. Now, I was on a call yesterday with a guy who does marketing, and we were talking about supply chains and things like that. You should be looking ahead at the moment as a business owner. You should be looking ahead and going, what might trade look like in 2-3 years' time? If you are sourcing things from somewhere where there is a potential risk, you need to adopt a really flexible business model. If you rely upon bringing stuff in from the United States, from China, where you might see there could be a problem, you need to start thinking about how you're going to manage that risk now. Now, there's no point in sort of turning around and completely changing your operation, because you don't know it's going to materialize. But you should be thinking about, okay, what happens if I do something with a lot of my clients where we talk about what I call the pre-mortem. That's the opposite of the post-mortem. The post-mortem is when things have gone horribly wrong and you're looking at what happened to cause that to go wrong. The post-mortem comes from sort of what a doctor does to a dead body, and they go, what caused the death? Well, we're talking about the death of a project, the death of a situation, whatever. So what do you do with a pre-mortem? A pre-mortem is what I'm suggesting here. You sit there and go, we're going to imagine it all went wrong, and we're going to tell ourselves the story that these are the things that caused it going wrong. Now, it's very easy for human beings to do that because we're very good at telling ourselves the catastrophe stories, because that's what our biology is based on. It's based upon avoiding risks. So you sit there and you tell yourself all the risks that cause the problem in your business. And what do you do about them? You then say, right, what are we going to do against all of those risks that we've just uncovered? We're going to do something to prevent those from happening. And that's a far better way of entering into these situations. And it leads to more of this flexibility and foresight in order to make people aware of what could happen and drive better actions.
Yeah. I mean, there's also two sides to it. One is things outside the business, and the other thing is inside the business. And I was particularly thinking of the example of a doctor. I mean, post-mortem, the pathologist tells you why you've died. The doctor might tell you, looking after, well, he might tell me, I don't know about you, but he might take one look at you, look at your weight, blood pressure, blood test results, and tell you what possibly could go wrong. Not that they will, but what could go wrong.
Absolutely.
And I think that's sometimes the thing that, because I've been stuck around with the past couple of weeks with people who are into management accounting, and all they are is looking at real numbers. There's nothing coming out of it in terms of predictions or whatever. And I think that's the problem. You look at the symptoms, but you don't look to see if there's anything else. Like
So you look at the symptoms, but you don't look for the underlying cause.
Don't look for the underlying cause, and if you break out in sweats, you've got palpitations, you've got headaches, they'll say, oh, you've got high blood pressure. But if you don't have any of those, is anybody looking at your blood pressure?
We're very poor at that.
These are things. And the other thing that is quite surprising, many people have heard of the term weak signals. Some people have, some people haven't. But the concept of weak signals, which depends on the industry you're in, you can actually look at your event horizon could be up to 30 years in advance. And I always use the example of, if you watch your cross-channel ferry going off into the channel, it's the propellers are chewing up the sea. There's foam and waves, and there's a wake and all the rest of it. Yobs on the deck are throwing McDonald's wrappers into the sea or something like that, and you watch it go off. But if you're standing on the stern of the ship and you look at the other way around, you can actually tell a lot about where it's come from. So you're looking at two ends of your almost of your timeline, but what you're looking at is you're saying, let's look at these big frothy waves have turned down into little ripples. They've spread out. They're in a curve. Where's this ship come from, or where's it going to? You can do that, but you can't just use one technique. You have to use a whole lot and consult consult a lot of experts. But there's lots of these weak signals that don't. I mean, it's just a manifestation of the somewhat cheesy phrase that people use. The future's already here. But like the bits aren't together. And if you look hard enough, there are signs. I'm not saying we can accurately predict it, but you can sure know enough to at least get off the train tracks before the train appears, rather than wait for it to be just
you see, the thing is, and this is, you were talking about weak signals there, Derek, and I think this going back to the sort of, we all know that if you lie on the train tracks, you're likely to get hit by something. What you should be doing is doing some measurement of how often trains come along the track, shouldn't you? So that comes back to this sort of, what can you do to do foresight analysis? You should be sitting at the side of the track and going, well, the first thing we should be measuring is how often trains pass this way, because if we're going to put ourselves in the path, we need to know what the signs are that things could be changing. I'll give you an example of this. We were talking about the pre-mortem just a couple of seconds ago. Something I did with one client. I had one client. They had a data center that was at the end of a runway of an airport. It was actually an RAF. It was an RAF air station, and it was a rule that was passed down from the risk officer that everybody had to have on their risk register the risk that an aeroplane could leave the runway and plow into the data center and destroy the data. And I asked the question, what is the use of that? And they said, well, we know it could happen. I went, yes. Has anybody measured how often it happens? And they went, well, it's never happened. Okay, that's a good sign. The second thing is, do we seriously think we can put in a mitigation for it? Because frankly, by the time we've noticed it, we're all going to be dead anyway. I was doing the workshop actually in this data center. And I said, by the time we've noticed that there's the loud roaring sound of the engine, we ain't going to be able to do anything about it. So what's the point of having that on this risk register? So we did the pre-mortem. We started saying, well, what if we were to get an earlier sign? What if we could find out something that actually would sort of give us an indication? Oh, and by the way, what if we decided that critical data wasn't in this data center, we put it somewhere else? So we did the pre-mortem. We pretended the plane had crashed into us. We asked the question, well, how would we have known? What could we have done? What would it? And we actually worked out something that was useful to us. Just sort of doing this, we're actually expecting something to be on. So this is what I'm sort of saying. We need to be more flexible. We need to do more foresight. We need to use these opportunities to say, right, let's innovate. Let's think of things that we could do to take advantage of a situation like this. Too often what we're doing is we're sort of sitting there going, well, we don't really know what the future is going to be like, so let's not try and look ahead. Well, we've got to look ahead. We've got to find ways of actually thinking about the future.
The other easy way of doing that thing is looking for patterns. So to go back to your example of the railway tracks, maybe I don't want to lie on the railway track, but if you notice a train comes by every hour, and then 30 minutes later something happens, you should be able to pick up on that very easily. Is it a train? Has somebody landed a helicopter on the railway line? What has actually happened? And I think that's the other thing. We're not picking up all of the signals, and we should be. I mean, and there was a very good example I came across from the States, and it was a little while after, for instance, the Eddie Stobbart drivers started wearing ties and pretending to be salesmen and things like that. but it was quite a good idea because they were representing the company. But somebody in the States took this a step further. Yes, they tarted up their drivers, but all the drivers had business cards and they were told to look out for things. And they noticed this was Kellogg's and somebody else. I can't remember who the somebody else was. They were delivering to Walmart, and they noticed that this other firm's lorries were actually arriving half empty. There was half loads appearing, and the same thing happened with Kellogg's. So they got together and ended up sharing the lorries. So they were full lorry loads, half as many of them, and they wouldn't have known about that or that opportunity if somebody hadn't been keeping their eyes open. And I think that's the thing. You've got to have so many more sensors, if you like, whether they're human or technology, to actually do this.
Yeah, let's get back to innovation though, Derek, because I think what we've described is ways in which a lot of this could help us to a lot of this is about how we can go about ensuring that we get good risk management. But some of this stuff that we see it should be driving us towards greater innovation. We should be looking at these signals. We should be looking at these things and saying, how can we take advantage of these changes? How can we take advantage of something which is going to happen or potentially could happen? Now, this is where I come back to the problem that I foresee, which is a lot of the time people will look ahead to a thing that could happen and it won't happen. And as a result, you are afraid of taking the risk of doing that work in order to be able to take advantage of a situation. we have to eliminate that risk feeling. We have to eliminate this waste problem, because the only way that you can really truly drive innovation is to turn around and go, I'm going to take this risk and it's worth going all in. It has to be a calculated all in. You have to do some measurement beforehand. But once you've got to the stage where you go, yeah, it's absolutely definitely worth the risk, it's absolutely definitely worth doing, you can see huge advantages, huge potential return on investment.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there as well. One is, if, say, it's something like a regulatory change or something which may or may not happen. If it doesn't happen, you could be stuffed. But the other thing is, if somebody is just literally simply predicting the future, this is the way the market will go. There might be a new market here, and you work towards that. If it doesn't quite happen, then that's absolutely fine. You've still got a lead on everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with the various project planning systems that we have. You have to allow for that sort of leeway, things to be 5 or 10% from where they should be. Otherwise, you get the no-go gate says no go.
Yeah.
Where you should be going, and everybody else isn't even anywhere near that.
You agreed. I agree.
So it does, to some extent, depend a little bit on the industry you're in. But if you're the Elon Musks of this world, that you can do it.
Let's finalize by sort of, we talked about sort of doing sort of trend analysis, foresight workshops, being flexible. For me, the great way of sort of advancing a lot of these is, as you and I have talked about, innovation is about collaboration. Collaboration, the only way that you can actually sort of take some of this on is to look for those collaborations. Now, you can talk about collaborations within your business. You can talk about collaborations with those outside of the business. Universities are great ways of getting in and started talking. I used to work with academics, and they'd love to have a conversation. Grab hold of an academic and have a conversation with them. Better than that, grab hold of somebody like Derek and have a conversation with him. Although, you might have to sort of learn to pronounce chameleon. You see,
chameleonomist.
So you might have to learn to do that. But just have, networking, having conversations with people are a great way of starting to see something from outside of your own position that will bring you that greater foresight, greater flexibility.
There's a lot to be said for a cup of coffee and a piece of cake.
There is.
Coffee, a piece of cake, and just bouncing ideas off someone's forehead.
Less of the cake though, because I know your doctor wouldn't like that, would he, Derek?
I don't know. Things are going the right way at the moment, so
the reason they're going the right way is because you've given up listening to him, haven't you? So that's obviously the easy way of sort of getting better advice from the doctor.
I'm setting up my own anticipatory ecosystem.
I love it. With that, I think it's time for us to bring this to a close before we start slagging off the health profession.
The health professionals, and we have time for one more before Christmas as well.
We do, don't we? When is that going to be?
December the 13th.
Let's just make sure that this time, when you announce that, I'm actually not going to be going to Italy or somewhere ridiculous like that. December the 13th, you say? What a wonderful time of the year, and that I'm looking forward to enormously.
Yeah, and I've got a ho 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 background for that as well, which I used last year. And if you use mirroring on your camera, it says OOO.
Oh, I'm not going to bother with that then.
You can put a hat on; it doesn't matter which way around it goes.
I'll do the hat.
Indeed. So, okay, well, it's goodbye from me then,
and obviously it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.